I was standing by the front door with my carry-on zipped and my suitcase upright, that little red tag I'd bought for fun dangling from the handle. 8 hours until departure, I told myself. 8 hours until tapas in the Gothic Quarter, until sunset walks along the Barceloneta. I'd laid out everything the way I always do. Passport on the hall table, printed boarding pass tucked into a slim leather wallet, charger cables wound and clipped, a thin blue travel shirt draped over my arm while I debated shoes. Loafers or the comfortable walking sneakers. The weather app promised clear skies over Barcelona. I'd even printed my own walking routes for the Bourne district and marked them in highlighter, the pages waiting in the mesh pocket of my backpack. My phone buzzed where it rested against the table's wood grain. I didn't hurry. I was still smoothing out the blue shirt's wrinkles, humming a few bars of an old Sinatra number out of habit. Then it buzzed again. I glanced down and saw the name. Kira, my daughter. I picked up the phone expecting a last-minute reminder, maybe a "meet you by security" text. Instead, my thumb opened a message that drained the warmth from my hands. "You are not coming to Europe with us. My husband thinks it's better if this vacation stays family only." I stared at the words. Read them again. A third time. The hallway felt narrower than it had a moment earlier. The suitcase suddenly heavier, like I'd packed bricks. Family only. The phrase rang in my head with a tinny echo. I was her father. I'd organized the trip, combed through reviews of restaurants, plotted museum hours, and booked the flights. I'd even double-checked if it was Barcelona's festival week, to make sure crowds wouldn't ruin the sightseeing. But now, apparently, family only did not include me. I set the shirt on the banister and sank onto the bench by the door. My thumbs hovered above the keyboard without purpose. What does a person even reply to something like that? The best I could manage was small and spare. Okay. I locked the suitcase, each click of the latches sounding like a door closing somewhere inside me. Then I dialed the airline, listened to the syrupy hold music, and cancelled the ticket to El Prat. The agent on the other end spoke gently, efficient and apologetic. "I'm sorry to hear about your change of plans. Mr. Mercer." I wondered if she could hear whatever had crept into my voice, something flat and heavy. Back in the living room, the brochures I'd collected for Barcelona and Valencia lay on the coffee table, their glossy folds suddenly garish. I moved them into a neat stack, just to do something with my hands. The house settled around me in that late afternoon way. Neighbors' kids yelping somewhere far off, a delivery truck growling past, the refrigerator humming like it always did. I tried turning on the TV for noise, landed on a news anchor mouthing about city council business, and kept staring through the screen at my own reflection. A man alone in a room made for company. Later, after darkness gathered softly at the windows, I did what everyone does when the quiet gets too loud. I reached for my phone and opened Facebook. The familiar scroll soothed at first. Someone's birthday cake, a cousin's fishing photo, a video of a golden retriever tipping over a water bowl. Then a post stopped my thumb mid-swipe. Evan's parents stood in front of the Sagrada Familia, spires reaching into a pale Catalan sky. Both of them grinning like the world had conspired to be perfect for them that day. The caption read, "Kicking off the best family vacation ever." My chest tightened. I tapped their profile, telling myself it had to be an old picture. A memory reposted. Another photo loaded. Fresh timestamp late afternoon in Barcelona. This time there were 4 faces crowded into the frame at a little cafe off La Rambla. Kira, Evan, his parents. Wine glasses blurred in the background. My daughter's caption, "So grateful for family time in the city of light." I counted the faces, 1, 2, 3, 4, like a child making sure the math added up. Family time. The words burned right through the glow of my phone and into the room's dimness. I set the phone down, got up, walked to the kitchen window and stared at my own faint reflection, overlaid on the backyard. The lemon tree, the old Adirondack chair, the motion light that sometimes clicked on when the raccoons made their rounds. In the glass, the reflection of my phone still showed the 4 of them smiling under that caption, my outline over their happiness. The contrast was almost comical if it hadn't been cruel. By morning I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, new photos popped up behind them. Paella pans, street performers, Evan's father pointing at a gaudy tile with performative delight. I made coffee with trembling hands, sat at the kitchen table and rehearsed sentences that sounded either too sharp or too meek. The time difference favored me. Late morning in Chicago meant late afternoon in Barcelona. I called. Kira answered on the fourth ring, bright and distracted. "Hey, Dad!" I could hear clatter and voices behind her. Someone laughing, a scooter passing on the street. Silverware scraping plates. "I need to understand something," I said, skipping every courtesy that would have only made me feel smaller. "What's that?" she asked, tone airy, eyes probably on something else. I saw the photos on Facebook. Evan's parents are there. Silence sat between us a beat too long. When she spoke again, her voice had cooled a few degrees. "Dad, we can explain." "You said it was family only," I replied. "What am I then?" "Look, Evan thinks—" She paused and gathered steam. "He thinks you can be overwhelming. He didn't want the vacation ruined. Overwhelming, ruined." The words landed like a shove. "I planned this trip," I said. "I bought the tickets. Evan's parents paid their own way." The defensiveness sharpened. "They don't expect us to take care of them constantly." Constantly. There it was again, held like a verdict. I could hear Evan's laugh in the background, carefree, like the conversation had no gravity at all. "Honestly, Dad," Kira went on, voice hardening into something I didn't recognize, "Evan was right. You're too needy." I looked over at the corkboard where I'd pinned my roots and reservations. Needy. I had time, I had steady love, and yes, I had money when they needed it. But needy. "I understand," I said, though the truth was I didn't. "Good, we'll talk when we get back." She waited for me to sign a contract I wasn't willing to sign anymore. When I didn't, she said, "Understood," and hung up before I could answer. The quiet after that felt like a pressure change in the house. I walked to my office and stood in front of the wall of frames. Kira's kindergarten photo with the gap-toothed grin. Kira pedaling a too-big bike while my hand steadied the seat. Kira in her cap and gown. Kira in a white dress on a day I paid for, right down to the flowers woven into her hair. I straightened one frame even though it wasn't crooked. That tiny act, steel yourself, line it up, make it true, felt like a promise to myself. I sat at the desk and slid open the drawer with the practical records I'd kept for years. Receipts, mortgage statements, bank records, charity donations, tuition payments. The down payment I'd pulled from my retirement for their first condo. The car note I'd carried when Evan's job went sideways. The credit card bills I'd paid the month their heater failed and they had no margin. I flipped through them without self-pity, just taking inventory of how I'd been useful. Somewhere deep in the stack, a question began forming, tight and bright. If I'm not family when joy is being portioned out, what exactly have I been? A familiar chime interrupted the thought. The banking app. I almost ignored it, convinced it was one of those fraud alert ads that never apply to me. But habit made me check. Transaction processed. I opened the app with my fingerprint. The details loaded, neat and neutral. 45, Restaurante Libertad, Barcelona, Spain, I scrolled. A hotel charge, boutique shopping, museum tickets, all within the last 24 hours, all on the authorized user card I'd given Kira years ago for emergencies while she built credit. They'd cut me out of the photos but kept me inside the wallet. I stood, the phone warm in my palm, and paced the office. The pictures on the wall were no longer nostalgia. They were evidence. Not for a courtroom, no, for myself. Evidence of a pattern I'd refused to name. Love had become a debit line that never balanced. "This is my chance," I heard myself say. Not loud, not triumphant, more like the words someone murmurs when they finally find the handle of a door in the dark. I opened the card management tab, navigated to authorized users. Kira's name appeared under mine, unassuming as ever. Years of access. Years of quiet withdrawals that came wrapped as gratitude and ended as expectation. Another notification pinged. Faites bonne tour, boutique chic. I watched the timestamp roll across the screen like a taunt. My thumb hovered over remove user. The app's warning flashed. "Are you sure?" "This action cannot be undone." "Yes," I whispered and pressed. Authorized user access revoked. The screen didn't cheer. It simply updated, clinical and final. I set the phone down and caught my reflection in the black laptop screen. An older man, yes, but not the softened version I'd been coaxed into being. A man with edges. A man who could still draw a line and then stand on the right side of it. The kettle on the stove clicked as it finished heating. I made another coffee. Outside, a neighbor started a mower, the motor rising and falling in familiar waves. Ordinary life continued its drumbeat. I took a slow sip and let the taste steady me. By the time the cup was empty, the door inside me had swung open to the next thought. This wasn't about a declined lunch in Barcelona. It was about establishing at last who I was to them and who I was to myself. The following morning broke with a pale light spilling across my bedroom curtains. I had fallen asleep in fragments, short bursts of restless dozing, dreams punctured by flashes of Kira's sharp voice saying the word needy. I shuffled into the kitchen and poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one Kira had once painted for me at summer camp. A little heart and the words "Best Dad" were scrawled in red glaze across the side. I traced the faint outline with my thumb, wondering when exactly that title had expired. Halfway through my first sip, the phone rang. An international number blinked on the screen, and I knew without looking who it was. I let it buzz twice, steadying my breath before I answered. "Good morning, Kira," I said evenly. Her inhale hissed down the line. "Dad, what did you do to the card?" Her tone was sharp, more accusation than question. "I tried to pay for lunch, and it got declined in front of Evan's parents. The waiter had to come back 3 times. It was humiliating." "That must have been embarrassing," I replied, voice calm. I lifted the mug again, savoring the bitterness. "Embarrassing?" she snapped. "It was mortifying. You can't just do that." "I need that card." "For what?" I asked softly. "I thought you didn't need me taking care of you constantly. That's completely different." Her voice climbed a register. "Don't twist this, is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. There was muffled conversation in the background, Evan's low voice, then Kira returning, sharper than before. "You fix this now or there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I asked. "When we get back, we're looking into care facilities," she said flatly. "You're getting older, Dad. You obviously can't handle your finances responsibly. We'll sell your house to pay for it." "You don't need all that space anyway," I froze. The mug hovered inches from my lips. "Care facilities?" I repeated, each syllable tasting metallic. "Yes, it's for your own good." Her voice had softened into mock concern, but the cruelty glimmered beneath it. I heard Evan in the background muttering, "Tell him it's for his own good." She parroted it like a well-rehearsed line. I let the silence stretch, heavy as lead. "Dad, are you listening?" "Restore my card access." "I heard every word," I said finally. "Good, so you'll fix it." "No." The line crackled with her fury. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I said, calm as the morning sun. "Enjoy the rest of your family vacation." "Dad, don't you dare!" she shrieked. But I pressed the red button, severing the call. The kitchen grew quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. My hands didn't tremble. They were steady as I set the phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. I stood, carried the empty mug to the sink, and stared out the kitchen window at the garden I'd tended for 30 years. The roses needed trimming. The lemon tree was heavy with fruit. This was my home, paid off, deeded in my name alone. And now they thought they could strip it from me as punishment for not being their silent financier. No, not this time. I walked into my office with new determination, pulled open the heavy drawer in the file cabinet. Out came the deed to my house, smooth paper embossed with my name. I set it aside, but it wasn't that document I lingered on. It was another folder, one I hadn't touched in months. Property title, 1186 Brookfield Avenue, Kira and Evan's house. My name solely and clearly was printed on that title. I remembered the day I signed it 2 years ago. "Just for the mortgage approval, Dad," Kira had said sweetly. "We'll transfer it to our names once everything's settled." Settled had never arrived. They'd been too busy, too distracted. Always next month, to Dad, or we'll get around to it. And I, foolishly trusting, had let it slide. Not anymore. I searched the desk drawer until I found the cream-colored business card of Marcus Lynn, the realtor who had sold me both properties. A trustworthy man, sharp, discreet. I dialed the number. He picked up on the second ring. "Marcus Lynn, Real Estate." "Marcus, it's Daniel Mercer." "Well, Daniel, how's retirement treating you?" His tone was warm, familiar. "I need to sell the Brookfield property," I said without preamble. Quickly, there was a pause. "That's the house you bought for Kira, isn't it?" "Yes. Is everything all right?" His voice softened, but he didn't pry. Everything's fine. I just need it sold. How's the market? Strong, he said. I heard the clicking of his keyboard. Similar homes in that neighborhood are moving around 180 to 190. You bought at 130, didn't you? That's right. You could walk away with a healthy profit, Marcus said. How fast do you want this moved? As soon as possible. Then we'll price it to move. I'll need your signature on the listing paperwork. Can you come by today? I'll be there in an hour. The drive across town was familiar. Past the bakery where Kira used to beg for cupcakes. Past the park where I'd pushed her on the swings. I turned into Marcus's office, housed in an old Victorian with a wraparound porch, the kind of place where business felt solid and rooted. Marcus greeted me in the lobby, his handshake firm, his eyes reading me more deeply than his words did. We sat across a polished oak desk. He slid papers toward me, explained the process, showed me comparable sales. I initialed here, signed there. His efficiency was comforting. No judgment, no probing questions, just action. When it was done, Marcus leaned back and said, "We'll start showing immediately. In this market, you'll likely see offers within days." "Good," I said, standing. "Price it to move, Marcus. Consider it done." I left the office lighter than I'd felt in weeks. Driving home, I put on the classical station. The violins filled the car, steadying me as I turned familiar corners with unfamiliar clarity. I passed Kira and Evan's Brookfield house on the way. Curtains drawn, lawn untended, mailbox stuffed with the junk mail of their absence. Soon it wouldn't be theirs at all. It never truly had been. Back at home, I opened my laptop. An email notification had already arrived. Property listing confirmation. Seeing those words sent a current of satisfaction through me. The gears were in motion. For the first time in years, they weren't the only ones calling the shots, but the house still held their things, furniture, clothes, keepsakes. If the property was going to change hands quickly, it needed to be emptied. I opened a new browser tab and searched, moving services near me. After scrolling past the corporate ads, I found a small, family-run business with glowing reviews, Dave's Honest Moving. The testimonials praised efficiency, discretion, and fairness. Exactly what I needed. I dialed the number. A gruff but friendly voice answered. "Dave speaking. I need help moving an entire house's contents into storage. It's a time-sensitive job. How soon?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning, if possible. Where's the property?" I gave him the Brookfield address. "The residents are out of town. I want everything cleared before they return." "Understood," Dave said, tone shifting into professional gear. "Been in those situations myself. We'll be efficient and respectful. Do you have a storage unit lined up?" "Not yet. I'll connect you with secure storage on Lincoln Avenue. They're solid. You'll want at least a 10x20 unit for a full house." Within minutes, Dave had patched in a woman named Janet from Secure Storage. Her voice was brisk and businesslike. "Unit 47B is available. First month's rent is $120, payable up front." "I'll take it," I said. I provided my card details. It was done. Back on the line with Dave, we finalized the details. "We'll arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. My truck, 2 guys plus me. Expect 3 to 4 hours depending on the weight." "Perfect," I said. "See you then." I ended the call and sat back in my chair. The plan was clear now. By tomorrow, their possessions would be out of the Brookfield house, stacked neatly behind a rolling metal door in a rented storage unit. By next week, if Marcus was right, the deed would pass to another family altogether. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I woke before the alarm, the faint gray of dawn stretching across the ceiling. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet pulse of the house. Today would be different. Today was action. I pulled on my old jeans and a faded flannel shirt, boots scuffed from years of contracting work. They felt right. Clothes for a man taking matters into his own hands again. By 7:30 a.m., I was driving toward Brookfield Avenue. The neighborhood was calm, sprinklers misting lawns, the smell of cut grass drifting in the air. I parked across the street, unlocked the front door, and let myself in. The house felt hollow, though not in a way that touched me anymore. The silence was simply practical, like an empty stage waiting for scenery to be struck. At 7:45, a moving truck rumbled up. White paint, Dave's Honest Moving stenciled on the side. Dave climbed down, sturdy, mid-50s, hair gray at the temples, hands rough from years of work. 2 younger men followed, unloading dollies and rolls of packing tape. "Mr. Mercer?" Dave asked, extending a firm handshake. "We'll take good care of this." "Appreciated," I said, leading them inside. We walked room to room. Dave took notes on his clipboard, eyes cataloguing the furniture, electronics, wardrobes. 3, maybe 4 hours with this load, he estimated. His tone was steady, professional. No questions about why. No judgment. Just the job at hand. The crew began in the bedrooms. I insisted on helping, despite Dave's polite warnings about liability. "I'm not that old," I said with a half-smile, hefting a box of books labeled in Kira's handwriting. One of the younger movers grinned, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of camaraderie. Room by room, the house emptied. Lindsay's, no Kira's closets held racks of clothes, half of them still with price tags dangling. Evan's office overflowed with gaming equipment and an elaborate desk setup, things I'd bought for birthdays and anniversaries. Each item carried a memory of a request framed as a need, always with the unspoken expectation that I would provide. Now those same objects slid into boxes, labeled with black marker, ready to be stacked in storage. In the living room, I paused at the sectional sofa I'd purchased last Christmas. They had chosen the leather, of course, modern and durable, Dad, perfect for entertaining. It had barely been used, the cushions still firm, the price tag still echoing in my mind. Watching the movers dismantle it, I felt no regret, only relief. In what would have been a nursery, I found baby furniture neatly assembled but untouched. A crib, a rocking chair, tiny blankets folded in a chest. My throat tightened. For a moment, doubt pricked. Was I dismantling dreams that hadn't yet bloomed? But then I spotted a folder on a shelf. Evan's credit card statements. Designer purchases, luxury items, weekends away, all during the months they'd sworn they were broke and begged me for help. The doubt dissolved. "You okay, Mr. Mercer?" Dave asked, catching the pause. "Just memories," I said. "Keep going." By mid-morning, sweat streaked my back, but the work kept me steady. I carried box after box, the weight grounding me. Labeled bins of Kira's books, Evan's golf clubs, electronics, handbags, kitchen gadgets I'd once thought would make their lives easier. All of it stacked methodically in the truck. At 11:30, the last box slid into place. The room stood bare, sunlight streaming across empty floors. The house echoed differently now, stripped of the illusion of permanence. I locked the front door, slipped the keys into my pocket, and followed the truck to secure storage. Unit 47B yawned open, cool and cavernous. The movers stacked everything neatly, row upon row, until the space was full. When the final box was set down, Dave wiped his brow. "It's all done, Mr. Mercer. 3.5 hours, just like I said." I handed him the agreed payment plus a generous tip. "Thank you, Dave." He gave a small nod, eyes kind. "Hope everything works out for you." "Family stuff's never easy." I offered a quiet smile. "You're right about that." Driving home, I felt a peculiar lightness, as though the truck had carried more than boxes away. It had carried the weight of years of silent obligation, neatly packed and stored, where they could no longer suffocate me. Back in my driveway, I parked and let the engine click into silence. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, screen glowing with notifications. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and finally checked Facebook. Dozens of notifications. Kira had posted, "Some people have no respect for family privacy. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you trust most." Comments beneath it were piling up, friends offering sympathy, others asking questions. She was playing the victim, painting me as the villain without a second thought. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was already unfolding elsewhere. The phone rang again, this time Marcus's number. I answered. His voice carried a smile. "Daniel, good news. We already have a serious buyer. Cash offer, no contingencies. A young couple relocating for work. They love the Brookfield property." My pulse quickened. "How much?" "185,000, Marcus said. "Better than we expected." I leaned against the counter, the figure rolling through my head. "And they want to close quickly?" "Immediately," Marcus said. "Tomorrow, if possible." I didn't hesitate. "Make it happen." That night, I set my alarm early. Tomorrow, the papers would be signed. Tomorrow, the house Kira and Evan had taken for granted would no longer be theirs. For the first time in years, my generosity would no longer be mistaken for obligation. Friday morning, the air held the crisp promise of summer not yet in full swing. I dressed deliberately, pressed shirt slacks, polished shoes, clothes for making statements, not apologies. By 9 a.m., I was at the title company's office downtown, a brick building with tall windows and polished brass handles that gleamed in the morning light. Inside, Marcus greeted me warmly, papers already spread across a mahogany table. The buyers arrived soon after, Michael and Sarah Thompson, a couple in their early 30s, all eager smiles and polite energy. Sarah carried a folder brimming with lists, while Michael's handshake was firm and enthusiastic. They reminded me of what Kira and Evan once looked like, before entitlement hardened their faces. "We're so excited," Sarah said. "The neighborhood is perfect. We can picture our kids growing up there." "Congratulations," I said, passing them the keys after signing the last of the documents. The pen scratched across the paper with a finality that filled the room. My signature, my choice, my property, now theirs. By noon, the bank transfer buzzed into my phone. $185,000 minus fees, a clean profit. I tucked the confirmation email into a fresh folder on my desktop labeled Victory. That evening, I drove past Brookfield Avenue out of habit. The Thompsons' U-Haul was parked in the driveway, the couple laughing as movers carried boxes inside. A baby crib leaned against the porch rail waiting to be assembled. Their future was beginning. The past had been cleared away. I parked across the street, engine off, watching from the quiet shade of my car. Just then a taxi pulled up. Perfect timing. Kira stepped out first, travel-worn but immediately alert. Evan followed, dragging a suitcase, his face stiffening as he took in the sight. Strangers unloading furniture into what he still thought was his house. Confusion shifted quickly to alarm. "Excuse me," Evan called across the lawn. "What are you doing in our house?" Michael looked up from where he was carrying a lamp. "Your house? I think there's been a mistake." He held out a folder with paperwork still warm from the printer. "We closed yesterday." "That's impossible," Kira snapped, eyes darting to the familiar porch. "This is our home." Sarah, gentle but firm, replied, "No, it's ours now." She glanced toward me as if seeking assurance. I stepped out of my car and walked calmly toward them, an envelope in my jacket pocket. Kira saw me and her face went from confusion to dawning horror. "Dad, what is going on here?" she demanded. "Why are strangers in our house?" I looked at Michael and Sarah first. "I'm sorry for the scene. Please continue your move-in." "Everything is fine." Then I turned to my daughter. "This house was mine. It always was. I sold it yesterday." Evan's face reddened. "What do you mean, yours?" "You gave it to us." I pulled the envelope from my pocket and handed it to him. "Check the deed. It was never transferred to your names." Kira tore into the papers, eyes wide. Her voice rose to that familiar shrill pitch. "You can't just sell our home." "I can sell my property," I replied evenly. "Which is exactly what I did." "This is theft." Evan barked. "We'll sue you. With what money?" I asked, tilting my head. "Your credit cards were declined in Barcelona, weren't they?" Michael and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, edging closer to their front door. I nodded toward them. "Please go inside. You don't need to be part of this." Kira's voice cracked. "Where are our things?" I handed her another slip of paper. "Unit 47B, secure storage, Lincoln Avenue. First month's rent paid." "You put our life in storage," she gasped, eyes blazing. "I preserved it carefully," I said. "Neatly packed, protected. More than you've done for me." Evan crumpled the paper in his fist. "This is insane. You can't do this to family." I looked directly at him. "Family doesn't exile fathers from family vacations while using their credit cards." Kira's face twisted, tears brimming but weaponized. "How could you do this to your own daughter? How could you do what you did to your own father?" I asked quietly. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Evan tried one last jab, stepping close. "We'll fight you in court." "The sale is legal," I said without flinching. "The property was mine. And now it's theirs." Michael reappeared in the doorway, his hand protectively resting on Sarah's shoulder. "Is everything okay?" "It's fine," I assured him. "Enjoy your new home." Kira and Evan stood on the sidewalk, luggage at their feet, looking like tourists who had lost their map. Their house, their life, their narrative. It had all slipped from their grasp. I walked back to my car with measured steps. Evan shouted behind me, "This isn't over." I slid into the driver's seat. classical music resuming as the engine purred to life. My voice was calm, steady, final. Yes, it is. 3 months later, the rhythm of my mornings had settled into something new. Quiet coffee, the crossword puzzle, a walk through the garden with pruning shears in hand. The chaos of Barcelona, Brookfield Avenue, and screaming phone calls had receded into memory, though never too far away. On a Tuesday in late September, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a man in a grey suit stood there holding a slim envelope. His face was professional, detached. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed me the envelope, had me sign his clipboard, and walked back to his car without another word. I closed the door slowly and carried the papers to the kitchen table. The lawsuit. I unfolded the documents, skimming the bold headings: Plaintiffs, Kira Mercer and Evan Reynolds. Defendant Daniel Mercer. The claims were grandiose: wrongful sale, theft of property, emotional distress. Their lawyer had done his best to paint me as a callous tyrant who had tricked them out of their home. I read every page, folded the stack neatly, and set it aside. No panic, no dread, just a quiet recognition that this was their next move. By afternoon, I was on the phone with my attorney, a sharp man named Harold Bloom, who'd helped me settle estate matters after my parents passed. His laugh was short when I summarized the case. "They don't have a leg to stand on, Daniel," he said. "The deed was in your name. The sale was legal. You even provided storage for their belongings. The court will toss this before it warms a bench." He was right. 2 weeks later, the judge dismissed the case outright. The ruling was blunt, unsympathetic. Property owner had full legal right to sell his own asset. Plaintiffs responsible for their own attorney fees. When Harold called to confirm, his voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Clean victory. They can't appeal without money, and from what I can tell, they're drowning. I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself a whiskey that evening. Not in celebration exactly, more like a toast to clarity. News travels quickly in a town like ours. By the following week, whispers circled coffee shops, church pews, and the aisles of the local grocery store. At the diner, I overheard one woman lean toward another and murmur, "Always thought that Evan fellow seemed entitled." At the hardware store, a man I barely knew clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good for you, standing up for yourself." Of course, not everyone approved. At the post office, Mrs. Green from 2 streets over gave me a sharp look and said, "Family should stick together no matter what." I smiled politely, nodded, and went on my way. Once her words might have pierced me. Now they slid off like rainwater. One Saturday morning, I ran into Marcus Lynn outside the coffee shop. He asked, "How are you holding up with everything?" "Better than I expected," I said truthfully. The gossip eventually dulled, as gossip always does, but the shift inside me remained permanent. For the first time in decades, my identity was no longer tied to what I could provide for others. One crisp afternoon, I wandered into a pet store I'd passed 100 times, but never entered. A sign by the door read, "Adopt, don't shop." Inside, the smell of cedar shavings and the soft yips of puppies filled the air. That's when I met Max, a golden retriever, 3 years old, big brown eyes filled with patience and hope. The owner explained, his family's moving overseas. He's been good with people, loves car rides, doesn't bark much. I knelt and Max trotted over, tail wagging, head nudging against my chest, as though he already knew we belonged together. I scratched behind his ears, and something unknotted inside me. An hour later, Max was in my passenger seat, tongue lolling happily out the window as we drove home. That night, he curled up at the foot of my bed, a warm weight of loyalty I hadn't realized I'd been missing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Max settled into my home as if he'd been waiting for it all along. He followed me from room to room, his paws soft on the hardwood, his eyes always watchful. When I brewed coffee in the mornings, he sat patiently by the table. When I read the paper, he stretched out at my feet, content with the quiet. But it was on our evening walks that I felt the shift most clearly. I'd leash him up, and we'd stroll down the familiar streets of our neighborhood. Neighbors waved, some stopping to chat, others simply smiling at the sight of a man and his dog. With Max trotting by my side, I no longer looked like someone abandoned. I looked like someone choosing companionship. Still, something inside me itched, restlessness. For years, My life had revolved around providing stability for Kira and Evan. Now that weight had lifted, I realized how much of myself I'd left unexplored. One night, while Max snoozed with his head on my knee, I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar, "Best RVs for senior travel." Page after page appeared. Trailers, campers, motorhomes. Words like freedom, adventure, and see the world on your terms leapt off the screen. I clicked deeper. Reviews of Airstreams, videos of retirees mapping cross-country routes, blogs full of sunsets and campfires. The idea hooked me instantly. The next day, I drove to a dealership just outside of town. Rows of gleaming RVs lined the lot, each one promising a different kind of escape. A salesman in a blue polo greeted me, launching into a practiced pitch. But I already knew what I was looking for. Something manageable, something I could handle alone, but spacious enough for Max and me. We walked past towering Class A coaches until I spotted it, a 25-foot Airstream, polished silver, gleaming under the sun. Compact but elegant, solid. It didn't scream excess, it whispered possibility. "Mind if I take it for a drive?" I asked. The salesman handed me the keys, and soon I was behind the wheel. Max perched proudly in the passenger seat as though he'd been born for the role. We cruised along the highway, wind tugging at his ears, his eyes bright with excitement. I glanced at him and laughed. Really laughed, for the first time in months. By the end of the week, the papers were signed. I traded in my second car and used savings to cover the rest. No loans, no debts. Mine outright. Back home, I parked the Airstream in my driveway. Neighbors peeked out their windows, curious. Max circled it like he was inspecting a castle, tail wagging in approval. That night, I sat at my desk with a map spread out in front of me. I traced routes with my finger. National parks, small towns, stretches of open road I'd only ever read about. Rocky Mountains, Grand Canyon, the Oregon coast. Places I'd dreamed of visiting, but always postponed for someone else's needs. Max lifted his head from where he lay and thumped his tail against the floor. "We're going," I told him. "Just you and me." I spent the next week preparing. Stocked the trailer with food, gear, and supplies. Bought Max a sturdy bed, travel bowls, and a harness for hikes. I even packed one photo album, just one, filled with pictures of Kira as a little girl. Before the disappointments, before the bitterness. A reminder of who she once was, and maybe who I once was too. The morning we left, the sun rose golden over Davenport. I secured the trailer, locked the house, and handed my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a spare key. "Water the roses if you think of it," I said. She promised she would. Max bounded into the passenger seat as though he'd been waiting his whole life. I started the engine, checked the mirrors, and eased onto the road. As we passed the city limits sign, a swell of relief washed over me. Davenport grew smaller in the rearview mirror, while the open highway stretched wide and endless before us. The first stop was Colorado. By dusk, we reached a scenic overlook, where the Rockies blazed orange and purple under the setting sun. I unfolded a camping chair, cracked open a beer, and sat with Max at my side. He rested his head on my boot, eyes half closed in contentment. I breathed in mountain air, crisp and clean, and realized something startling. For the first time in decades, I was living a life designed only for me. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was freedom. The days on the road blurred into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Mornings began with sunlight spilling across the silver curve of the Airstream, Max stretching and yawning before nudging me with his cold nose. We'd brew coffee on the small propane stove, step outside, and watch mist roll over whatever landscape we'd parked in the night before. Colorado was our first stretch, and it did not disappoint. We hiked short trails, me cautious with my knees, Max bounding ahead with uncontainable joy. At a ridge near Estes Park, I watched him sit at the edge, chest puffed out, ears pricked, as if he was surveying a kingdom that had always been his. I took a photo, Max against a backdrop of jagged peaks, and saved it as the wallpaper on my phone. In the evenings, campgrounds filled with the low hum of other travelers. Retired couples, young families, a few loners like me. People waved, sometimes inviting me to share their fire. Around those flames, stories spilled easily. Where we'd been, where we were headed. Nobody asked about children or in-laws or betrayals. They asked about miles, routes, sunsets. I found I liked that better. One night I met a man named Walt, silverbeard, eyes still sharp. He'd been on the road 5 years, a widower with no plans to stop. "The trick," he said, poking at the fire with a stick, "is realizing you don't owe anybody your presence, just your honesty. Be where you want to be, not where you're expected to be." Those words lodged deep. For years I'd let expectation tether me. Now I was learning to live differently. After Colorado, we drifted south into New Mexico. Desert air wrapped around us, dry and vast. I parked the Airstream outside Santa Fe, where adobe walls glowed pink at sunset. Max and I wandered narrow streets, pausing to watch street performers and artists selling paintings. For the first time in years, I bought something for myself, a small canvas of a golden horizon, signed only with initials. It hangs in the trailer still, a reminder that beauty can be simple and self-chosen. At White Sands, Max ran circles in the dunes, his paws kicking up sprays of gypsum like snow. I laughed until my sides hurt, snapping photos until my phone storage warned me it was full. Each picture was a small proof of joy I'd once thought unreachable. In Arizona, we reached the Grand Canyon. Standing on the rim at sunrise, I felt the enormity of it press against me, the layers of earth carved by time, indifferent to human drama. I thought of Kira then, not with bitterness but with distance, as though she belonged to another lifetime. I whispered into the canyon air, "You can't ruin me anymore." The wind carried it away, and for once I believed it. Life on the road wasn't without challenges. Rainstorms rattled the Airstream at night. Once, outside Flagstaff, I nearly backed into a ditch while maneuvering into a campsite. But each obstacle forced me to learn, to adjust, to rely on myself. And each time Max was there, steady, loyal, tail wagging as if to say, "We've got this." By the time we reached California, I felt like a different man. In Yosemite, I hiked as far as my legs allowed, resting often, breathing deep, watching waterfalls crash down with ferocity. At Big Sur, I parked the trailer by the cliffs, waves pounding far below, and cooked dinner on the small stove while Max dozed in the doorway. The Pacific stretched out forever, and I realized I had finally outrun the shadow of dependency. One night, as I sat by a campfire under a canopy of stars, I pulled out the single photo album I'd brought. Flipping through pictures of Kira as a child, missing front teeth, pigtails, Halloween costumes, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not of regret, but of release. Those memories would always be mine. What she chose later did not erase who she had once been to me. I closed the album, slid it back into the cabinet, and leaned down to scratch Max's ears. "It's just us now," I whispered. He sighed contentedly and pressed closer. And for the first time in decades, just us felt like enough. By the time autumn leaves began to flame across the highways of Oregon, Max and I had carved out a new rhythm of life. Travel wasn't just about moving anymore. It was about finding little pieces of belonging in unexpected places. We rolled into a small coastal town one afternoon, salt air drifting over the road, gulls wheeling above. I parked the Airstream near a modest RV park, tucked behind a row of cedar trees. The host, a woman in her 60s named Carol, waved me in. "Spaces are open down by the bluff," she said, her voice warm with the cadence of someone used to welcoming strangers. That evening, as the sun sank over the Pacific, painting the waves in molten gold, Carol and a few others gathered by a communal fire pit. She offered me a folding chair and a cup of cider. Max sprawled at my feet, eyes half closed, clearly content to be where laughter rose and flames cracked. Introductions passed easily. Tom and Linda, full-timers heading north. Rick, a fisherman who lived out of his van. Carol, who split her time between Oregon summers and Arizona winters. The talk turned to roads, to weather, to places worth seeing. Nobody asked about children, about family histories. They cared only about where the wheels had carried us and where we dreamed of going next. I realized how refreshing that was. For once I wasn't dad or provider, or the one who paid. I was simply Daniel, another traveler with stories to trade. Over the next week, Carol and I became friends. She had a way of cutting through pretense with a glance, her laugh quick and unguarded. She told me she'd been widowed young, raised 2 sons alone, then decided one day she wasn't going to spend her last decades rooted in a house that felt too big. "Freedom suits me better," she said, raising her cup of tea and a toast. One afternoon we walked the beach with Max bounding ahead. She asked about the Airstream, about the miles I'd traveled. Then gently about what set me on the road. I hesitated. The wound wasn't raw anymore, but the scar was still tender. "My daughter," I said finally. "She decided her family didn't include me." Carol's eyes softened, but she didn't pity me. "Blood doesn't always define family," she said simply. "Sometimes it's who shows up at the fire with a chair for you." Her words struck something inside me. I thought of the countless hours, the sacrifices, the money poured into a version of family that had excluded me. And here, in the flicker of firelight among strangers, I felt more belonging than I had in years. We parted ways when the weather turned, Carol heading south toward Arizona, me continuing up the coast. But I carried her words with me like a compass. In Washington, I parked near a forest where fog laced through towering pines. A young couple camped nearby invited me to share their meal, grilled salmon fresh from the river. They asked me about my travels, about Max, about the Airstream. As we ate under lantern light, I noticed the way they listened, genuine and unhurried. The next morning they waved as I pulled away, calling, "Safe travels, Daniel!" And it occurred to me that connection didn't need permanence to be meaningful. One evening in Montana, I stopped at a small roadside diner. Max waited patiently in the truck while I slid into a booth. The waitress, maybe in her 40s, noticed the Airstream parked outside and asked where I was headed. We talked for nearly an hour between her rounds of pouring coffee. When I left, she handed me a slice of pie wrapped in foil. "For the road," she said with a smile. These small kindnesses stitched themselves into me like threads, weaving a new definition of family. Not obligation, not manipulation, but presence, kindness, choice. And in the quiet of the Airstream each night, with Max curled at my feet, I realized that I wasn't running anymore. I was rebuilding family, I finally understood, was not about who shared your blood or your last name. It was about who shared your fire, your road, your silence, and stayed. Winter came sooner than I expected. Snow dusted the mountains in Wyoming, as Max and I parked at a quiet campground, our Airstream gleaming like a silver lantern against the white landscape. Nights were colder, the kind where you wake to frost feathering the windows. Max would curl close, his warmth grounding me through the long silence. It was during one of those nights, as I sipped coffee wrapped in a flannel blanket, that my phone buzzed with a notification. An email, subject line from Kira. I stared at it for a long time before opening. "Dad, we need to talk. Things have been hard since the house. Evan lost his job. We've been staying with his parents, but it's not working. I shouldn't have said what I did. Can we meet?" I set the phone down on the table. My breath came slow, measured. For months I had imagined what I might feel if she reached out. Anger, maybe vindication. Instead, I felt only caution, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff debating whether to look down. Max nudged my hand, sensing the shift in my mood. I scratched behind his ears, grounding myself. The next morning I wrote back, "Where and when?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe in Denver. Neutral ground. I parked the Airstream on the outskirts of the city and drove in with Max, leaving him with a dog-sitting service nearby. The cafe was warm, smelling of cinnamon and roasted beans. Kira was already at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug. She looked older than I remembered, tired, lines etched where laughter used to sit. When she saw me, her eyes welled. "Dad," she said softly. I sat down across from her. No embrace, no easy warmth. Just space between us, weighted with years of imbalance. "I'm sorry," she blurted, her words tumbling. "For the vacation. For the house. For..." She stopped, wiping at her eyes. "I was wrong." I let the silence stretch. "I'd learned on the road that silence often tells more truth than words," she continued, voice trembling. "Evan, he doesn't understand responsibility." He pushed me and I let him. "But it wasn't fair to you. I see that now." Her hands shook as she pulled a folded photo from her bag. It was of her as a child, maybe 7, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair. She slid it across the table. "I miss that. I miss us." I picked up the photo, studied it. The smile on her young face, my hand steadying her small legs. For a moment, my chest ached with the memory of simpler love. But then I remembered standing in my kitchen months ago, hearing her threaten to put me in a care facility, to sell my home. I remembered the betrayal carved into her words. "Kira," I said carefully, "I will always love the little girl in this picture, but I need to know if the woman sitting in front of me understands what family really means." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I think I'm starting to." I nodded slowly. Then show me. Not with words. With actions. She reached across the table, her hand hovering, waiting. I didn't take it right away. Instead, I said, I won't fund your life anymore. I won't be your safety net. If we rebuild anything, it has to be built on respect, not obligation. I understand, she whispered. Finally, I placed my hand lightly over hers. Not a promise. Not forgiveness. Just a beginning. When we left the cafe, she hugged me for the first time in years. It felt fragile, uncertain. But it was real. I picked up Max from the dog sitter afterward. He leapt into my arms, tail wagging furiously. As I scratched behind his ears, I realized something important. Reconciliation was possible, but only if I kept the boundaries I had fought to create. Family, I now knew, wasn't just something you were born into. It was something you built and rebuilt through choice, and this time the choice would be mine. Spring arrived with a gentleness that reminded me of second chances. By then, Max and I had logged thousands of miles. The airstream bore the marks of the road, dust, scratches, a few dents, but it felt more like a companion than a possession. Everywhere we went, people admired it, asked about our travels, and I'd smile, realizing how far I'd come, not just in distance, but in spirit. Kira reached out a few more times after our meeting in Denver. Short phone calls at first, careful, almost timid. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She just asked how I was doing, where I was, how Max was. Each time I kept my answers simple, my tone even. I didn't rebuild trust overnight, but I left the door cracked open. No wider than I chose. Evan never called. That didn't surprise me, and maybe that was for the best. One warm evening in Utah, Max and I camped near a red rock canyon. As the sun dipped, painting the cliffs in fire and shadow, I sat with a journal on my lap. I'd started writing more lately. Memories, reflections, plans. I wrote about Kira as a child, about the house I'd sold, about the silence of the Grand Canyon, and the laughter of strangers around campfires. Words came easier now, unburdened by bitterness. I looked up at the stars, sharp and countless in the desert sky. Max pressed against my side, sighing contentedly, and I realized this was family too. The loyalty of a dog who asked for nothing but presence. The kindness of strangers who shared meals and stories. Even Kira, fumbling her way back, perhaps learning at last the difference between love and use. For decades, I had confused generosity with belonging. I thought giving was the only way to be needed, to be loved. Now I knew better. Love wasn't measured in checks written or mortgages covered. It was measured in honesty, respect, and choice. I packed away the journal and poured a small glass of whiskey. The fire crackled, sparks rising like tiny prayers. I raised my glass toward the horizon. To freedom, I whispered, and to only giving what I choose to give. Max thumped his tail as if he agreed. The road stretched endlessly ahead of us. New towns, new faces, new sunrises waiting just beyond the bend. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was hungry for it, and I knew this much with certainty. I would never again mistake usefulness for love, because I was no longer a man left behind. I was a man moving forward.